He thought her renewed attention meant progress. In reality, it began the moment he stopped chasing. That should have been comforting. Instead, it exposed the entire pattern. When he first met her, nothing felt obviously wrong. She was warm in a way that made ordinary moments feel charged. A late reply from her felt different than a late reply from anyone else. A short conversation could stay in his head all night. A small sign of interest felt bigger than it should have. That was part of the problem. The connection never had to become fully real to become emotionally powerful. It only had to be vivid often enough to keep him invested. At the beginning, he explained the inconsistency in generous ways. She was busy. She was cautious. She had been through things. She moved slower than other women. He told himself all of that because the good moments were strong enough to make the distance feel temporary. When she was present, she was fully present. That was what made the whole thing difficult to read. She was not cold all the time. She was warm in flashes, interested in bursts, engaged in carefully timed windows that made him feel like he was getting closer just when he was starting to doubt the connection. So he adapted. Without fully noticing it, he became the one carrying the momentum. He sent the first message more often. He kept conversations alive. He suggested the plans. He repaired the tone when things felt off. He gave the benefit of the doubt before she asked for it. And because he was trying to be grounded, patient, and emotionally intelligent, he did not call the pattern what it was. He called it complexity. He called it timing. He called it something worth understanding. That is how men get trapped in these dynamics. Not because the situation is always dramatic. Often because it is just uneven enough to keep hope alive. Every time he started to feel the distance clearly, she would do something that pulled him back in. A warmer message. A more open conversation. A sudden softness. A version of her that felt more available than she had been the week before. And every time that happened, he reset emotionally. He stopped focusing on the inconsistency and started focusing on the possibility again. He told himself that maybe this was the turning point. Maybe she was opening up. Maybe she was finally getting comfortable. Maybe all the patience was starting to pay off. But the pattern never actually changed. It only pulsed. And because it pulsed, it felt alive. That is what made it so effective. A completely cold person is easier to walk away from. A completely available person is easier to understand. But an inconsistent person can keep someone emotionally occupied for far longer than either of those. Especially when every return of warmth feels like proof that the connection was real all along. Eventually he got tired. Not angry, not explosive, just tired. Tired of trying to read tone. Tired of guessing whether a good week meant anything. Tired of carrying the emotional weight of something that only seemed to move when he moved it. So he stopped reaching as much. He did not announce it. He did not create distance to play a game. He simply stopped feeding the connection with the same level of effort. He let a message sit. He stopped being first every time. He let silence stay silence. And that was when her energy changed. Not subtly, immediately. She became warmer, more attentive, more available. She reached out first. She sounded lighter, more curious, more emotionally present than she had been in weeks. At first he felt relieved. It looked like movement. It looked like maybe she had finally realized what she could lose. It looked like maybe the space had helped. And because he wanted the connection to be real, he interpreted the change in the most hopeful way possible. So he leaned back in. Not recklessly, just enough to meet her halfway. Just enough to respond to the warmth with warmth. Just enough to believe this time might be different. And almost as soon as he did, the old pattern returned. The distance came back. The uncertainty came back. The uneven replies. The drop in energy. The selective attention. The quiet feeling that he was once again more invested in the connection than she was. That was the moment the illusion finally broke. Not because she did something shocking. Because the timing became too clear to ignore. Her attention had not risen when intimacy deepened. It had risen when access felt threatened. That distinction changed everything. Because intimacy moves toward honesty, consistency, and steadiness. Access management moves toward whoever is pulling away. It is not always conscious. It is not always cruel. But it is still a pattern. And once he saw it, he could not unsee it. He started comparing her behavior in two different conditions. How did she act when he was fully available? And how did she act when she thought he was slipping away? The answer was painful because it was simple. When he was available, she relaxed into distance. When he withdrew, she moved closer. That meant the strongest force in the connection was not mutual investment. It was instability. He had spent months trying to decode her feelings when he should have been studying the pattern itself. Because patterns tell the truth faster than explanations do. Anyone can say they care. Anyone can sound sincere in the moment. Anyone can become suddenly attentive when they feel control shifting. But consistency is harder to fake. Reciprocity is harder to fake. Steady effort is harder to fake. And those were the very things this connection never seemed able to hold. Once he understood that, the question stopped being how to make it work. The real question became why he had accepted emotional whiplash as evidence of depth. Why did unpredictability feel meaningful? Why did rare warmth feel more valuable than steady care? Why had he treated intermittent attention like something he needed to earn? Those were harder questions, but they were also the useful ones. Because until a man understands why inconsistency hooks him, he stays vulnerable to the same pattern wearing a different face. So he made one clean adjustment. He stopped offering full access to someone who only became engaged when that access was fading. He stopped confusing her renewed attention with transformation. He stopped rewarding instability with deeper emotional availability. And when she reached again, he finally saw it clearly for what it was. Not proof, not progress, not the beginning of something safe. Just the pattern trying to restart itself. This time he did not feed it. He did not argue. He did not accuse. He did not try to force a final confession out of her. He simply stopped participating in a connection that only sharpened when it was losing its grip on him. That was the first honest move in the whole story. And it taught him something most men learn later than they should. Attention is not the same thing as commitment. Intensity is not the same thing as care. And when someone becomes most interested at the exact moment you detach, that does not always mean they love you. Sometimes it means they loved your availability. Sometimes it means they loved your attention. Sometimes it means they were attached to access, not to you. That is why men need to stop treating temporary warmth like final proof. If a woman only leans in when she feels you leaving, do not just study the affection. Study the timing, because timing reveals motive. And if the strongest version of her interest only appears when your distance creates scarcity, then the bond may have been built on emotional control more than real connection. The lesson is simple, but it is not easy. Do not judge interest by how intense it becomes when you pull away. Judge it by how consistent it is when you are fully present. That is where the truth usually is. And once a man learns to see that clearly, a lot of confusing connections stop looking complicated. They just look finished.